You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Max Gandy.
Sup?
Sup. So Max, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
I am originally from the US, but I was living in Korea up until a couple months ago. I lived there for about 3 years while I was getting my career as a chocolate writer off the ground. And right now I'm full time writing about chocolate for both my own website and for freelance as a freelancer for other publications and working on my own podcast, which is about chocolate and cacao.
You know what's funny is that when you're a child, you see Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and now you're basically doing that, except you're writing about chocolate.
Yeah,
So
I'm the reporter who was trailing along behind them, horrified.
a lot of people is you just saying that my mind immediately thinks like the Candy Shop song by 50 Cent. I don't know why. It's just
Oh, yeah, no, nothing like that.
it's funny because like you talk about writing about chocolate, and if you say that to anybody about like maybe having a career, they're gonna be like, what do you mean you write about chocolate? Like you're a blogger? But that's basically what it
Yeah,
is. But you also go
kind of.
through kind of a more of a lengthier process.
Yeah, well, I think people forget the word writer in there. Probably spend 80 to 90% of my time behind a computer in terms of actual working hours. Just researching beforehand takes up maybe 20% of my time. And then afterwards, I actually have to write things, edit them, go back and forth with any editors I might be working on if it's a freelance piece. And then with podcasting, man, it's 95% just research and editing the piece afterward. The interviewing and talking to people is nothing. Like,
S- So we say researching chocolate, that's a little bit going
mhm.
farther than the nutrition label, obviously. But what types of
Yeah.
things do you research about it? Can you try to explain me through your process?
Yeah, so my focus is on writing about chocolate in the context of travel, and that doesn't necessarily mean when you're going to another country or even another state, but I the main reason that people come to my site is to read the chocolate travel guides that I write, which are focused on basically writing about all of the chocolate shops in any given city or sometimes country if it's really small, like Singapore or Taiwan.
So
And
have you gone to these places and actually experienced the
yeah, yeah.
chocolate there?
Oh, everything is about only a place I've been. I haven't written about anywhere I've never been before. That would be
So
very unethical.
through your time, like when you go into another country, is the first thing like most people search for like I need to find a hotel to put my stuff at. You're like, no, we got to search for a chocolate shop. We got to make sure
Yeah.
there's some guy back there that seems like he knows what he's doing.
I mean, honestly, I prefer to travel alone when I'm working, when it's a business trip, because I spend most of my time in the hotel room or out going to chocolate shops or out visiting chocolate people, as I call them, which could be cacao farmers or some kind of connector or a retailer. I don't actually see the cities I visit that often, unfortunately.
So what is exactly like take me through like the step process of a cacao farmer? Because I always got that mixed up because I always heard of that word and I thought people were just misspelling coca.
Yeah, okay. So, well, coca, COCA, is actually the plant. It's a leaf, and it's the plant from which cocaine is made through a lengthy process. But cocoa is the English word for cacao, the Mayan dialect, but the Aztecs also had a word for it that was like cacao or something like that, which we wrote in English, but like I don't think they had a written language that we could compare. It was all just oral. So the Spanish took that word first, and then they believe it was actually just miswritten at some point, and that's how we got the English word cocoa or cocoa.
Is cacao made on a tree?
It's all the same word. It's just cacao is the scientific name. Yeah,
Is
yeah. Cacao is a big fruit. It's a big pod, maybe the size of an American football, and it just grows directly on the tree.
So how does a farmer come along the kind of the process of being able to harvest cacao?
Yeah, so cacao grows on trees that are purposefully planted in places. There are very few places where you can still find wild cacao. And for the most part, it's grown monocrop, which means that it's just a lot of farms that are only cacao trees, which is not great for the environment. But there's been a movement recently to try and have cacao as a plant that's added to existing farms. And farmers harvest it just like you would harvest coconuts or you would harvest apples or peaches in the US. You
Why
just
isn't
go
it
and pick
why
them.
isn't it like a major kind of resource here? Because it seems like everybody prefers chocolate over basically any vegetable.
Yeah, it's definitely not a vegetable. It's more like an avocado. It's something that's good to have in moderation,
And you
but
don't want to
only
wait
high
too
quality
long. Yeah,
versions.
you don't want to wait too long to cut it either, because it feels like every time I buy an avocado, like after the day I buy it, it's like, oh, it's expired. You missed your date. I was like, what?
Yeah, no, a cacao, the little seeds inside, which is the part of the fruit that you actually eat, will immediately start looking for, it'll start germinating, looking for a way to plant itself in the ground. So it has to be immediately processed after the pods are cut off the tree.
Now, what do you?
So
Okay, so this actually brings me to a really weird question. It's going to dive a little bit off of chocolate, but kind of an adaptive instincts that humans have is known to kind of spread a little bit, plant their seed kind of. Is that simple with plants as well? Because I know some plants have a distinct characteristic immediately when they get chopped down or something, they immediately start their seeds immediately go into the ground.
I missed the middle part there. It seemed to cut out.
Well, the adaptive instinct between plants and humans is kind of spreading a little bit of a seed, kind of in a way, kind of implanting a piece of yourself for kind of, it's more of like an immortality aspect, but kind of a keep way of
Yeah,
survival.
leaving a legacy.
Yeah. So is that simple with plants too? Like cacao, you're just talking about like chopping it down, the seeds immediately start to kind of find a new way to grow.
Do you mean, is it simple to propagate, to grow cacao
Well,
just
like
from the seed?
it's like a weed. The fact that if I chop one down, it seems like I'm actually spreading more.
It depends on the soil itself. I'm sure there are places in which cacao grows like weeds much more easily, but I don't think it's ever necessarily an easy thing to grow. There have been some cacao trees that are 40, 50, 60 years old. Cacao trees can live as long as humans if they're treated well, but it's not very common.
Now, do the farmers, so they harvest off the trees by taking the pods, so the cacao pods, and
Mhm.
they chop them up? What do they do?
So they usually it's harvested with a machete. So they'll take a machete and they'll cut the pod off at the base where it's growing from the tree. And then they'll usually take the same machete and break open the pod, maybe an inch thick, like shell on the outside, and they scoop out the beans. And the beans themselves are the cocoa beans, cacao beans. They're covered in a white pulp at that point, and they're put into boxes and they're fermented for 3 to 7 days, depending on the variety. And then they're
And
dried and put in
what what
bags and they're shipped to makers. It's a long process.
what do they soak it in for fermented? Is it just vinegar or something?
No, it's fermented in its own juice in the pulp, just like grapes are fermented in their own juices. Except we use seedless grapes. You don't find seeds in your wine, but in the case of cacao, the seeds are affected by the fermentation, making it sort of a fermented adjacent food. It requires fermentation to create that chocolatey flavor that we associate with chocolate.
How much can you
It's
pull off of a cacao pod?
how much cacao is in each pod.
Yeah, like is it a small amount, is a large amount? Because I know with like when you're
It
cutting up pineapple and
depends.
harvesting pineapple, those take years to grow. Pineapple take like a total of 2 years to grow. So they plant giant farms of them, but when they harvest them, it seems like you got to cut out the core, cut off the skin, and you get a very small amount for the lengthy process of growing the fruit.
Yeah, pineapples are such a weird fruit. They look weird too.
Yeah,
Some
they're
pineapples you can
sharp.
actually eat the inside. Oh yeah, it can hurt. Don't step on a pineapple.
Yeah,
Um,
don't. That's actually probably the only way you could die is by eating the leaves of a pineapple.
ugh. But cacao, it varies a lot. Like apples, for example, can be really small or they can be really big, and cacao buds are the same way. but generally a cacao tree will take 2 to 4 years to start bearing fruit. It'd be 2 years for the hardier varietals, and then 4 years for the more rare, like heirloom varietals of cacao. And I mean, that's a lot of time to invest in one tree for a lot of farmers, especially when you can buy trees that are already going to be prepared to produce within a few months. It's hard nowadays to convince farmers to start growing cacao. And there are a lot of parts of the world that don't that are currently growing a lot of cacao that it doesn't look like they'll be able to continue producing at this rate. Yet people want to eat more and more cacao, and it's really creating a problem for chocolate makers in particular.
Is there kind of a danger to maybe one day chocolate not being a value, like a more kind of expansive resource, such as like not being able to get it as easy?
Uh, it could be. I'm hopeful that there will just be better prices paid to farmers, so people will be enjoying better quality chocolate, except maybe a fifth the amount. As I said, like enjoying in moderation. I know when I was a kid, we used to buy boxes of like 12 bonbons, or not even bonbons, they're just the shitty chocolate you buy from the convenience store. And I would eat the entire thing in one sitting. And
Uh,
looking back, it might have been like 20% cacao. But if I'd been able to go buy with like two little bonbons made with 70% cacao total, I would have eaten less cacao but enjoyed it much more.
Yeah, I see with like cacao kind of being like obviously it seems like it's probably more of a family farming type thing, like you kind of get
Yeah,
your dad was a cacao farmer and then you kind of fall into
yeah.
it rather than a new farmer trying to dive into it. But it seems like we have a world that's filled with chocolate, but if you look at it really, how much of that chocolate is actually cacao?
Yeah, I was in Vietnam last month and we went into this chocolate shop that advertised itself as being a fancy, like Belgian chocolate place. But the chocolate really did not taste very good. And looking at all the wrappers around, you looked at the line with the ingredients on it, and it said both in English and in French. It said first was sugar, and then cocoa butter substitute. Written on the next line was substitute. It was cocoa butter substitute. There was zero cacao in the entire product. And legally in the US, that can't be called chocolate. That would be illegal to sell it as chocolate because there's a legal definition of what is chocolate. It has a minimum percentage of cacao. But in Vietnam, it's fine. And a lot of people grow up with that as their thought of, oh, that's what chocolate tastes like.
That's crazy
And it,
because a lot of famous chefs refine their palate. Like I'm not a chef at all, but I went to Hawaii and I went to the Dole Plantation, which is like the
yeah.
giant pineapple farm. And
Mm.
so I had one of the fresh pineapples that they were growing there. Like, so they picked a whole bunch from that day and they let us try some very, very fresh. I was like, this is amazing, but it tastes just like regular pineapple. Then I went back home and had a normal pineapple from here and it was completely different. I was like, this is nothing like I thought it was. It
Yeah,
was, it was
no, a
like, it's
similar
complete.
flavor, but different experience.
Yeah, well, it's like it's different when it comes like when you're getting the authentic version. Like probably once you've had like a real like a cacao bar, like actual chocolate, like the with the full on high percentage of it, not just artificial flavoring and all these things that you see in Hershey Kisses and all this stuff, you probably had a
Mm.
completely different experience where you wouldn't even want to go back to eating a Hershey Kiss.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, you can buy bars of chocolate made with 70%, 80%, 99% cacao. There was a video on Facebook that I saw a few months ago of this guy trying a 99% Lindt bar, and inside I just crumbled. I was like, oh, that sounds disgusting. Because I've had wonderful 100% chocolate bars, but if the cacao is of bad quality and processed badly, then no matter what percentage it's at, it's gonna taste horrible. And I know that Lindt bar tastes horrible. But
Yeah.
if you had a different 100% bar from a better maker using better cacao, it would have been a completely different experience.
So out of all the countries that you've been to, which is the one that you find has the best kind of chocolate?
There are a lot of countries that I haven't been to in a while. Like I have family in Europe and I haven't visited them in like 6 or 7 years. And so if I went back now, I would find a lot more high quality chocolate than I would have 6 or 7 years ago. Because the
Well,
last few years, there's just been like a renaissance of high quality chocolate makers around the world.
where do you
So it's
think that
tough
came
to
from?
say.
Where do you think that this spark of kind of chocolate came from, just with its popularity? Because I know they talk about the health benefits of chocolate, dark chocolate,
Yeah.
you want to eat at night and all these types of things. It's like, but where is the actual, like, this spark for it becoming so popular nowadays?
Well, a lot of people will trace it back to the American craft chocolate movement, which really started in like the late 90s with this winemaker. I think his name is Robert Scharfenberger, Bob Scharfenberger, who he decided, I'm going to start a chocolate factory. And so he started making chocolate in the late 90s, and he made like blends of chocolate. But there's this one origin from Madagascar. It's from this one guy's plantation almost exclusively who imports the cacao to the US. And this Malagasy cacao tastes so fruity and so unique. So by the early 2000s, there were a few makers in the US in particular who were making chocolate just like the Scharfenberger guy. And a few of them were using this Malagasy cacao. And it's really been the pinpoint that a lot of people have pointed to that's like, oh yeah, I tried a bar made with Malagasy cacao and that changed my life. Like that changed my perspective of what is chocolate and it got me so interested in it. So it's been a long time coming, but this American craft chocolate movement that's involved so many people for maybe 10 or 15 years before it started catching on around the world has been like the base for a lot of people's craft chocolate journey and where they find like craft chocolate makers and where they draw inspiration. But there are random outliers who started maybe 2006 or 2008 down in Costa Rica or down in Peru and who are still going today.
Do you find that when obviously like a critic for any type of product or any type of movie, like when you eat a chocolate bar, are you taking in more than just the flavor, but also kind of the look and the appeal and also the design of maybe, because a lot of people don't understand that uh, crafting chocolate is kind of an art. The people also do some pretty really amazing carvings on top of the chocolate as well that they don't really appreciate when they open up the wrapper.
Ah, yeah. Some people have so the carving you're thinking about is the mold. And there are some people who might like carve a signature into a bar, but it's really tough to do that part. A lot of people also confuse the words chocolatier and chocolate maker. A chocolatier is someone who takes finished chocolate and uses it to make something. But a chocolate maker uses cacao beans and they refine it down. They take those beans, the ones that were fermented and then dried and then shipped to them from the farm. They take those beans and they roast them after they've been sorted and they peel them and then they grind them down in a machine and they take them and they temper them, which is basically raising, lowering, and then raising again the temperature of that chocolate so that it's at exactly the correct structure. The fat is at the correct structure, that it won't melt too quickly, that it won't, it's basically the most stable form of chocolate. And then it's put into molds. So there are a lot of different molds. You can buy custom molds. And after all this is done, chocolate makers are pretty exhausted. It's been a very long process. So you have to package all of that molded chocolate. And I think sometimes makers don't realize that that packaging is the first thing that consumers see. And consumers aren't thinking about all these dozen or so steps that happen before then. But by the time they get there, makers are so tired of having to worry about such things, not even to mention social media and promotion and reaching out to people like me or like media folks, that
Now,
they don't consider that you just see that packaging and that mold and you're like, oh, that's cool.
yeah, it's it's really weird because people just go for the brand name now. It seems like
Yeah.
average everyday American, when they just see, oh, Three Musketeers, oh, Hershey, I already know that's going to taste good. And the fact that you will buy Reese's cups because they just put peanut butter and chocolate together. It's not even like, how much of that are you actually looking up? Like, I bet you could get something way better if you actually went and tried to find it. You probably experienced stuff that in America was amazing at the time, but then you go to a different country and you eat and you're like, this is real chocolate.
Yeah. Or just like with the dish, if you had, I don't know, crappy Chinese food in the US and then you went to China or you went to Taiwan or Hong Kong and you actually had that version of that dish in the country it's from, and it's a reliably good dish. Like in the US, we have bad burgers. you'd be like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. Like General Tso's chicken, I ate that all the time as a kid. It exists in China, but like it's not a common dish. But like beef and broccoli, for example, that's a legit Chinese dish. You can find that in China, and it probably tastes better in China.
It's the same thing within America. We have spaghetti and meatballs. If you go to Italy, there's no spaghetti and meatballs.
Yeah, there's like one tiny village where they make meatballs and they happen to add it to their spaghetti. It's not like, yeah, it's not like
It's
a
like
typical
that's not
dish.
real Italian. And we're like, oh, it's Italian. It's a spaghetti. You do the whole
Yeah,
motion when you're cooking
yeah.
it. But it's crazy because a lot of people when they look at chocolate, they immediately like think of it just as candy, as this type of thing. But you can use it for so
Mhm.
many different things. And this is where we want to dive into with cooking. Like what types of foods can you cook with cacao? I know you can use like is that like chocolate German cake, everything like that? Is that made with
Mhm.
cacao?
So cacao is most often used to make chocolate, but also in some countries there are lots of big processing plants where they take the cacao and they press it for cocoa butter and cocoa powder, or cacao butter and cacao powder, whatever you want to call it. Same thing. And the cacao butter is basically just the fat, and the cacao powder is the solids, the mass, plus a little bit of, um, plus maybe 20% ish fat. And most often in baked goods, they're only using the powder version because the butter is actually sold to the cosmetics industry because you can make a lot more money using it for that.
Now,
So,
hold on. Is
mhm,
cacao powder? Is that something like used to make chocolate syrup as well? Because I remember like very, very detailed that I was drinking chocolate milk one time using Hershey's chocolate syrup, and my buddy was actually putting cacao powder into his drink. And it seemed like his wasn't as strong, but it definitely tasted a lot smoother.
did he add it? It was the chocolate syrup plus the cacao powder, and
No,
yours was
just
just the
my
chocolate syrup
no, mine was just the chocolate syrup. His was just the cacao powder.
and water.
Yeah, oh no, in milk.
Any sugar added?
I don't know too much about that. I don't know if he did add sugar to it or not.
Because, like, you know how you make cocktails, right? You take simple syrup and you take like maybe a juice or a lemon juice or something, and you add the alcohol. Imagine if you just had the lemon juice and alcohol over ice. You'd be like, oh, this is not very sweet, and you'd want to add some simple syrup.
Yeah,
Hershey's is basically the simple syrup plus the flavorings already. It's a base of sugar, so it's
yeah,
going to be really sweet.
that's what I was saying. Mine felt like it was stronger in taste and smoother. His felt like it was a little bit more like basic kind of, but it went down easier, I would say, than mine did. Like mine, I felt a little
Yeah,
bit sluggish afterwards when afterwards he was able to go do something.
yeah, because you were just drinking sugar for the most part.
Well, that's America. We love that.
Yeah, so much soda. I quit drinking soda when I was 13 because I realized it wasn't adding anything to my life. I was like, I don't think I actually enjoy this. I just drink it because everyone else does, and I've not missed it.
It's just the norm. Now, what's this? What about Rocher chocolates? Those
Um,
things that it seems like my mom, that's all she wants ever for Christmas is Ferrero
yeah,
Rocher chocolate.
yeah. Ferrero Rocher is God. Who are they owned by? It's owned by one of the largest. I think it's Nestle, one of the largest chocolate manufacturers in the world. There are maybe 50 chocolate manufacturers who are
Nestle
making
owns
over 80%
Nestle
of the
owns
world's chocolate.
everything.
Nestle
Owns
owns a lot, especially in the US.
They own Hot
Nestle and
Pockets.
Hershey's.
They own
Yeah,
yeah,
that doesn't surprise me that much.
they
They
own
own a lot
Hot
of infant
Pockets.
formula. No, infant formula. They have cornered the market on that, and it's fucking rough.
They're feeding your baby chocolate.
No, they're feeding your baby expensive ass milk, and it's it's a fucking cartel, man.
Man, I'm
It's
telling you, you
ridiculous, but
look at
it's all over the world.
that rabbit on the front of Nesquik should have gang tattoos. That's what's up.
Yeah, and some gold chains too.
They
They'd make
actually
money for
one
it.
of my childhood favorites was the cereal straws. You know what I'm
I
talking
have
about?
a vague recollection of that. I think I preferred to use Twizzlers.
Yeah, I would go through 3 straws in one drink. My grandma's
God,
like,
well, but they probably
you're just
disintegrated.
you're just eating the straw. You're not even drinking it. I'm like, what? Every time I can't. It's like when you have gum in your mouth, you just can't not chew.
Well, I will be the first person to admit that when I was in middle school and I went home to an empty house, before I got off that bus, I would go to the 7-Eleven, I would buy two or three Milky Way or Three Musketeers bars, go home, unwrap each of them, put them on a plate, put them in the microwave, heat them, and then just eat them with a fork while watching afternoon cartoons. It
Hold,
was disgusting,
hold on a
like
second.
looking back.
You ate it with a fork?
I ate it with a fork because it was microwaved. I would like take my finger and I would just like lick the rest of the chocolate
Do
off.
you cut your pizza up with a knife and everything too?
No, but it was all
Okay.
melty. I wasn't just gonna like touch it.
uh,
Like I microwaved like sugar bars flavored with cacao. Like most of the chocolate sold in the US is more than 50% sugar. It's just chocolate flavored sugar. Like the chocolate cake you eat at least purports itself to be chocolate flavored cake. But like in the US we sell chocolate bars as chocolate bars. We don't say they're chocolate flavored bars even though that's what they are because they're almost all sugar. They're much more sugar than cacao.
So my favorite movie theater snack was always Snow Caps, that chocolate, but I would always kill the
That
box
was
like 10 minutes before the movie would even start, like when the previews were rolling. And then my grandfather, who's a candy addict, like he has a freezer in his shed that he just has bags of Halloween candy out there. He'll be like, I'm going to go work on the lawnmower. And then he'll just be out there all day. And I will never see the lawnmower being worked on at all. But my grandma is a big, big, big Reese's peanut butter cup fan. And she like before I thought like, oh, you eat the candy, you just open it up, eat it. And she taught me, she's like, put them in the freezer. I was like, what do you mean put them in the freezer? She's like, just put them in the freezer. And like an hour later, come back and grab it. Completely different.
yeah. It's I mean, it's the difference between like when you take, how with fine wine or with other like fine foods, people say, "Oh, you savor it, you put it in the mouth, and you let it touch all the corners." Yeah, well, you can do the same thing with single origin chocolates, but then a lot of people prefer to eat bonbons or flavored chocolate bars, and they just bite into it. Like they bite into it, and that's what they prefer to do when they're eating things, like to chew things. They don't like it to melt in their mouth. It creates weird textures that people don't really like. And I think what your grandma's getting at is that she just likes to chew her chocolate. And with the Reese's, I mean, I used to do the same thing. I wouldn't put them in the freezer, but I would like just chew it and I would eat it. I wouldn't savor it. It was just a way to have more sugar. And I liked that version of the sugar carrying
It feels
bar.
it's weird though because when you freeze it, it seems like the taste of chocolate gets a lot stronger.
Yeah, because it hits your mouth first and it makes the peanut harder to dissolve. Because when you put things in your mouth, your saliva actually already starts to digest them first. It's chemical digestion, I think, or something, and before mechanical. I don't know, but like it's basically your mouth is breaking down the chocolate first because the peanut butter takes a little longer to actually like come to mouth temperature, so you can taste the chocolate first.
So I'm about to ask you a lifelong question I've always wanted to know the answer to. Do you think you might have the answer to this question?
I don't know.
Okay. When you go to an ice cream place and they have chocolate, then double chocolate and triple chocolate, is there a legit difference or is it just darker versions of chocolate?
I don't know. It probably depends on the shop. I would assume that there's chocolate ice cream. And then, oh, do you mean it's like a smooth chocolate? Like there's not chocolate chunks or something in it?
It's weird. They have this thing called chocolate and Baskin Robbins. They have chocolate. Then they have double chocolate, and it seems like it's a darker shade of brown. And then they have
Yeah.
triple chocolate, and it seems like it's almost like a black in a way. And I'm like, is that just because there's a stronger version of that chocolate in there? And the other ones are like, because you can get light chocolate and then dark chocolate. I'm like, is it just different forms?
That's funny. In Japan, they actually call dark chocolate black chocolate. And so a lot of people will use like the darkest cacao powder they can find to flavor their chocolate. But I would assume that it's like a light milk chocolate and then maybe a light dark chocolate and then a really dark chocolate used to flavor those ice creams.
Now, a lot of times with like stuff that food and these things, like a certain experience that people have that causes them to become linked or passionate about something. With cacao, did you have an experience with chocolate, like something that you really remember with as a young age, or something that was kind of a formative moment for you that made you want to decide to kind of be a chocolate enthusiast later in life?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. No, I mean, I went to do a summer program in California, and the day I was supposed to move in, I'm actually from the East Coast. My mom like flew with me all the way to California. I'd never been to the West Coast before, and she helped me move into my dorms. And the day before we were moving into the dorms, she decided we should go and check out the city. So we went to this chocolate tasting that she found on Yelp. This was in 2012, back when Yelp was not vilified, and it it just opened my eyes. I mean, the owner, who's still a good friend today, she explained how chocolate is made. She explained that there are farmers behind chocolate. Chocolate doesn't just grow on trees. It never occurred to me to think about how chocolate is made. I was 16, and I was just like, oh, holy crap, there's like a whole world here. And I didn't drink coffee at all, so I had no other like preconceptions of like fine food or like savoring your food. I was just like, oh, this is so interesting. And so for the next like 4 or 5 years, I just spent all my time, my free time outside of school, learning about chocolate and about cacao farmers. It actually played a big role in deciding what my major in university would be, because I wanted to learn Spanish, because cacao comes from Latin America, it comes from South America, and I wanted to learn more from the mouths of the farmers themselves. And subconsciously, it steered a lot of my decisions in my life. Before 2 years ago, I decided, okay, this is what I want to do, and I'm taking it seriously.
Do you find that like when you try and explain chocolate to some people, it's a little bit kind of hard for them to understand? Because I think people just have the preconceived notions, like myself, that chocolate is just it's a quick treat. You know, you can get it anywhere, and that's actually it's true, but not really in the right way. It's not pure chocolate. It's not the type that you're going after. The ones you're pursuing, you're pursuing a more, I guess, vitalized experience, I would say, a wholesome one rather than the ones that we just stick with the artificial flavoring of some sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily artificial flavoring. It's cocoa powder, but it's not strong. It's like vanilla beans versus vanilla extract. Like it's still
Well,
cacao.
it's like our coffee here.
It's like super weak.
Like I know like for me, coffee's coffee. It doesn't matter what type of bean it comes from. It tastes the exact same. It doesn't mean anything
Yeah.
to me. But I had some kids from Romania and Bulgaria come over here. You're like, your coffee is shit. I was like, what does that mean? They're like,
They
it's
don't like
not
brewed
good
coffee. They
coffee.
prefer espresso.
They're like, it's not good
That's what they
coffee.
mean.
I'm like, what do you mean it's not good coffee? I'm like, you're drinking it, so don't talk shit. And they're like, no, like I'll bring you coffee. And they brought me coffee in one day, and I was like, it tastes the same. He goes, you just don't have a critiqued palate. I was like, what
Uh,
does that mean? Does that mean if I go to Romania and I'm used to drinking your coffee and then I come back, will I hate the coffee here?
there's definitely a difference between coffee in various places, but it's mostly just the preference of the people there. Like in Korea, people really liked espresso based drinks. It would be You'd be really hard pressed to find any brewed coffee there, whereas in the US, people prefer brewed coffee because they've gotten used to making it at home. There's a whole culture of like Maxwell Coffee House made itself into a household brand, that you prepare your own coffee at home. And so people have grown up and gotten used to brewed coffee, even the smell of brewed coffee. And so I'm sure they were thinking, oh, this is shit. This is so weak.
Do you find
And
like
it's just a
you
matter
don't
of preference.
so do you travel alone or do you travel with other friends that kind of have the same adaptive love for chocolate?
I usually travel alone because when I was living in Korea, the only time I had to travel was pretty limited. And so I was really traveling for business. I was traveling for the business I was building. And I preferred to be able to just do what I needed to do without having to worry or concern myself with, oh, I should be doing touristy things because I'm traveling with you. It's like, no, this is a business trip. And I'll try to see the important sites. Like if I go to Paris, I'll try to see the Eiffel Tower, but it's not my main concern.
You'll be eating a chocolate bar on top of the Eiffel Tower.
Oh, it's so much work. You have to climb all the stairs.
They don't have an elevator?
They do, but it's really expensive. I'd rather just spend that money on a nice hotel or something with a view of the Eiffel Tower.
You just eliminated obesity in America if you made people have to take the stairs and actually pay to use the elevator.
No, no, no. They have to actually swim across to Paris. They have to swim all the way across, at least to England.
Oh my God. I don't think anybody's doing
Eliminate
that one.
literally everyone.
But it'll breed out the weak. Well, tell me a little
Mm,
bit like of like because obviously when you're kind of looking at chocolate and putting it into a chocolate bar, there's a thing that is am I mistaken this, but it's a little bit like potion making. It's called like chocolate alchemy.
um, you can blend just like you can blend in wine different varieties of grapes. You can blend different origins of cacao. There's a lot of people who there are several people who import cacao, especially into Canada and the U.S. or in Europe even, and they sell a lot of different origins. Sort of like a retailer, like a grocery store has seven different types of chips. You can buy all those chips in one place. These orders, you can buy different origins of cacao from those places. So even people who want to make chocolate at home, if you have maybe a $500 investment, which is incredibly cheap for making a product like chocolate at home, you can buy several bags of cacao beans and a little melanger, a little grinder, and you can shell everything by hand and you can make your own chocolate. It's kind of crazy.
Now, after learning so much about chocolate, what do you find that you do first before you buy chocolate?
Um, what do you mean? I don't usually buy chocolate for my own consumption these days.
I mean, if you're going to write a review or if you're going to critique chocolate, if you're going to experience a flavor of some sort in like another country and write about it, what types of like, what's your process through it? Because you obviously have a list of things you take into account. You have a list of things that you rate. You're not just rating the flavor, right?
Yeah, I started off my site doing reviews because actually that's what I was convinced. My friend convinced me that I had to start a website, and then I got this grant from my university to go study in Latin America for several months, and I decided, okay, this will also be my blog for that trip. And slowly the reviews have stopped because I realized I don't really enjoy critiquing chocolate in that way. I prefer to talk about a business's whole aesthetic and flavors and just how you feel when you visit. But there are still reviews on my site. And I guess a more appropriate thing to talk about would be my approach to writing the chocolate travel guides because I'll do the research, I'll look for all the places I have to visit, I'll map them out, I'll import that into my bookmarks, and I'll figure out, okay, what's the best path? When are all these places open? Like, how can I get there via public transport? And then once I actually get there, I'll take pictures and I'll make sure the hours are correct. If I can, I'll try and talk to the owner and I'll see where they're coming from. And then I'll look, and if they have bonbons, I'll try a regular bonbon and one flavored bonbon, something that interests me that sounds good. And I'll judge the skill and the quality of the chocolate based off of those two. And if applicable, I'll buy a pastry or a chocolate bar. But I don't, you kind of like what you like. There's there's nothing wrong if someone has a different style as long as it's well done.
So if I
Like
put
I
a,
think a
like,
lot of people are a little overly critical of things like that.
would you still prefer a good old Milky Way or something that you used to have as a kid?
Oh God, it would taste like plastic, to be honest.
But how would it
It's
taste?
so sugar.
It's because you've been exposed to what is known as the real chocolate, not the sugared down version we have. You know what I mean?
It's kind of like if you have soda versus if you're like, I could also give you a fresh orange that I just picked off of my tree. It's like comparing orange soda to that fresh Valencia orange that you're having in Spain. You're like, oh, I like this one better. But some people will still prefer the soda, and that's totally fine as long as they know that there's also the option of trying the orange.
Yeah,
It's just most people don't know that the orange is out there.
my grandfather wouldn't like he prefers like the dollar store like money safe option. And I'm like, why? He's like, it tastes better. I'm like, what? Like this is way more expensive and it's more authentic and it's straight from the place. And he's like, it just I like this version better. And I'm like, is that because you've just defaulted your taste buds to something, or is that truly how someone can process it? Because I know there's two types of syrup as well. Like there's a thing also known as king syrup, which is like a kind of a fancy rich person syrup. Um, and there's also like the normal Miss Buttersworth, and obviously there's many other versions. But for me, Miss Buttersworth is way better because it's just sugar. But my grandfather and everybody on my dad's side of the family that's from Baltimore, they're all drinking like king syrup on their pancakes and stuff. And I'm like, I can't eat this. This tastes like crap. And they're like, because it's not as sugar processed, it's more raw. And I was like, I can't eat this. I don't prefer this because it's way more expensive. I'm like, well, I just wasted 2 plates of pancakes dumping syrup on top of it.
What did you have as a kid?
Miss Buttersworth,
Ah, what did they have as kids?
royal syrup.
Ah,
Yeah,
see, there
see,
have been a lot of studies done that have said that a lot of people will still prefer the thing that they had when they were younger. And part of it, I think, is comfort, but also just familiarity. Like, what do you associate that
it's
flavor with?
it's
The
nostalgia.
pancakes.
It's
Yeah,
nostalgia. I mean,
that's definitely part of it.
it's funny because a lot of people don't understand when it comes to memory. Memory is so powerful. A scent or a taste can link you back to a certain memory.
Mm,
And
hmm
I think these types of familiar foods are what makes people so passionate about them, even though they might even get a better version of it, but to them, the version that they always remembered is the one that will taste better.
it's hard to sometimes understand other people's perspectives and where they're coming from. For me, I really want to see the world. It's something that I've made a goal of mine. And even if every place I go, I don't see every tourist site, I feel like I get a pretty good experience of what the place actually is like. But many people, that would make them so anxious and so nervous, and to travel without much of a plan, they would they would go out of their minds, and they just prefer to stay in the same place for their whole lives, which for a long time didn't make sense to me. But I know now that it's just their different perspectives, their different mindsets, and their different personalities. And some people in the same way will prefer Mrs. Butterworth's their whole life, and they'll never want to try other things. And even if they do, they'll be like, all right, fine, I tried it, but I like this one better
It's
still.
crazy. It's
It just
crazy.
is what it is.
I'm telling you, it's crazy with some people how I like just the way I was like kind of looking at your site, and it's crazy in a good way. I'm not calling you a nut job or anything, but it was cool to see because I was like, there's this thing like a lot of people consider like being a candy maker and all these dream jobs as kids, and then you're going out and experiencing literally tasting different chocolates from around the world. Did you ever think at one point in your life this was what it was going to turn out to be?
No, when I first discovered chocolate, I kind of thought I'd be a chocolate maker. I tried making my own chocolate for years, and I just realized there's so much good chocolate out there that I'd prefer to promote and have other people try than to go through all the work of making my own brand and not even being sure if I want to stay in one place. I always had this idea that I wanted to travel the world. And if you're going to start a business that sells a product, you kind of have to be in the place where the people are to sell them the product. And that's not really what I wanted. I realized I'd prefer to be a connector and share with people where they could find these really good chocolates that, for the most part, are kind of invisible. Like, social media has played a really big role in allowing small, like, cacao producers and chocolate makers to set up a profile of some kind that's so much easier than trying to set up a website, and has brought them immediately onto the stage. In 20 minutes, you could set up an Instagram profile, put up a few pictures, and you're accessible just like that. It's amazing.
Do you find that
So
social media has kind of helped out a lot with chocolate? Because I know it's kind of a hard process to grow actual cacao and all these things, and I could see where it would be hard for just a person that wants to start up farming to be like, I'm going to start growing cacao. It's like, why don't you start with something easier like a tomato plant? But you get to see all these information and articles about, like, first of all, chocolate being so beneficial to your body. Um, Obviously, it's good in a little small amounts, not eating a chocolate bar every day. It's probably not the healthiest option for you, but there's benefits to it too, like helping with serotonin levels in your sleep. If you eat a little bit of dark chocolate at night, can also curb cravings. Um, these types of things that a lot of people don't really experience. And, it really goes into account when you look at a food critic or someone that is reviewing a food and they're sitting there actually enjoying it and actually savoring every single bite, where you see a lot of people just shove it in their face.
I think what social media has done has been that it's been the great equalizer, as a lot of people have nicknamed it, in that it's made it easier for a lot of people to just immediately connect with others. Like, back when I started doing the reviews, I started my Instagram page actually as just a place to put up like profiles, sort of like Honey, like Humans of New York, of the people that I met in my travels. I tried to do it once a day for like the entire time I was in Ecuador, for example. maybe 3 months or so. And then I was like, all right, whatever. And I forgot about it for maybe 2 years. When I came back to it, I realized that this whole community around like people in chocolate had grown and just kind of sprouted around this one platform. And I was like, oh, holy shit, I can actually use this from my small town in South Korea to connect with people in France, in Philadelphia, like in Finland if I wanted to. They were there because everyone could converge on this one app. And it's been kind of amazing to see it grow over the last few years as well.
Yeah, it's definitely
So
social media has given a way for a lot of people to connect. It's given us the chance to be able to talk. And I know you said you had you had a little limited amount of time to speak, but I appreciate you at least doing my podcast and explaining to me this wonderful life of chocolate. I mean, living the what we would call the Willy Wonka lifestyle, at least some person like me, which I think is amazing. And I really want to give you here a minute at the end to kind of promote your content too, so people can find your awesome articles and also your awesome podcast.
yeah, if you would like to listen to the podcast, which focuses on hot topics and destinations, kind of like This American Lifestyle podcast, pieced together like a little puzzle. It's called Chocolate on the Road. And the website where you can also find the show notes for the podcast is damecacao.com, DAMECACAO.com. And I also have my hands in a bunch of other little projects, but those are the two main ones at the moment.
It's funny because I would have asked you to spell me cacao, but then you spelled .com as well. Yeah.
Some people .co and then they're like, oh, I can't find it. Or they spelled dame cacao in Spanish means give me cacao. So it has like two meanings. But some people spell it like Dame Coco and it redirects now, but there's a lot of misspelling still.
Well, thank you so much, Max, for being on the podcast. And stay tuned for another episode of Out of the Blank.